president is pressing world leaders to enact even tougher sanctions against the Kim regime. Let's bring in our own Brian Todd. Brian, it looks like some of the recently tightened sanctions, they may be having an impact.
They could well be, Wolf. Tonight, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is citing some evidence they're getting from human intelligence, indicating that the sanctions have taken a toll on Kim's regime. Tillerson said specifically, members of North Korea's military could be feeling the heat. This comes as President Trump calls on North Korea's closest ally to keep up the pressure on Kim Jong-un. President Trump implores his Asian allies, don't let North Korea's young strongman get away with his weapons buildup.
The future of this region and its beautiful people must not be held hostage to a dictator's twisted fantasies of violent conquest and nuclear blackmail.
Tonight, Trump is hitting Kim Jong-un on two fronts, another personal attack and a call on China to tighten the economic screws on Kim. But at the same time, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says U.S. intelligence indicates the sanctions just imposed on Kim following his hydrogen bomb test in September are working. The highest-ranking North Korean defector in decades, a former diplomat, tells CNN the sanctions could be chipping away at the loyalty of Kim's closest lieutenants.
After the sanctions started, Kim Jong-un didn't have enough money to buy the hearts of North Korean leadership. So these years, Kim Jong-un could not deliver the luxury, gifts to his senior leaders. So far, the only means he can use is the reign of terror.
The new sanctions are supposed to be cutting North Korea's oil imports, cutting Kim's sales of textiles overseas, and shutting off the flow of money from the laborers he sends overseas who build statues and buildings in places like Africa. The U.S. believes they send back more than $500 million a year, almost all of it going into Kim's pockets to be used to buy off those closest to Kim.
The regime actually gives you bonuses, gives you gifts. You may get cash, you may get a television, you may get a car. And it also provides a platform for basically engaging in extortion. So you were able to squeeze people in the market. You were able to engage in businesses that maybe other people aren't.
That's the carrot approach Kim uses to keep his elites loyal. The stick, according to the defector, has been Kim's binge of bloody purges since he took power. Hundreds of top officials executed, including his own uncle, some with anti-aircraft guns.
Mostly all the elite and leaders in North Korea are frightened. That's why it seemed that Kim consolidated his power in a very short span of time. But what I want to say, for the long run, I don't think that he actually consolidated his power.
Analysts believe the sanctions are eroding Kim's ability to pay off his elites. They say he might have stashed away a lot of money and goods to pay them off while the sanctions take effect. The question tonight is how long that stash is going to last and what happens when it runs out. Wolf?
Good question, Brian. That defector also gave you some really fascinating insight into why Kim really wants to build his nuclear weapons arsenal.
That's right, Wolf. Tae-Young Ho says once Kim gets a nuclear weapon that he can actually launch at America, that's when he's going to want to negotiate with the United States. They says Kim believes he's going to be able to strong-arm the U.S. into pulling all of its forces out of South Korea. Then he says Kim believes South Korea is going to collapse. That's his goal at the end of this. It's strange, but that's what Kim believes, he says.
Very strange indeed. All right, Brian, thanks very much.
This would be a fatal miscalculation. This is a very different administration than the United States has had in the past. Today, I hope I speak not only for our countries, but for all civilized nations when I say to the North, do not underestimate us and do not try us. We will defend our common security, our shared prosperity, and our sacred liberty. We did not choose to draw here on this peninsula. magnificent peninsula, the thin line of civilization that runs around the world and down through time. But here it was drawn, and here it remains to this day. It is the line between peace and war, between decency and depravity, between law and tyranny, between hope and total despair. It is a line that has been drawn many times in many places throughout history. To hold that line is a choice free nations have always had to make. We have learned together the high cost of weakness and the high stakes of its defense.
It's kind of outside the purview. We're a domestic service agency, but I really think that what President Trump has done recently is just project this level of strength all over the world, and you can see it's coming back. I mean, the issue before is that we weren't respected on the world stage, and now that we have this president doing the things that he is doing abroad, visiting and showing the strength of America and the support we can provide to people who are in the business of good has been phenomenal. It's benefiting everybody.
Katie, speaking of respect, it's Katie Horgan, U.S. Marine Corps veteran. How much does it matter to troops when their commander-in-chief steps before them and projects a message of strength and support and belief in their mission?
I think it matters a lot. It matters to have your boss come down and recognize you for the work you've done. I think what they would appreciate most, and what I would appreciate most, is for him to take action and improve our standing on the world stage. And in particularly on the North Korea issue, I'd like to see him put more pressure on China. So he's had a lot of tough talk on Twitter. I'd like to get away from that and exercise some soft power, push China. I mean, they're really the only thing that's keeping North Korea hanging on. So let's get behind the scenes and push them to stop supporting
Sean
them.
Parnell, former U.S. Army Ranger. When we look at projecting American power on the world stage, what's the most important place that you look at?
Well, I look to the commander-in-chief to project strength. I think that it's really important for the president to speak with moral clarity. To your point, I don't necessarily have a problem with the president going on Twitter and voicing his opinion to the masses, to his constituents that voted for him. I think that's why people elected him. We elected the president because we believe he is a fighter, and he has a massive social media following where he can reach over 100 million people in 5 minutes. Take it.
Show of hands, who thinks he should tweet just as much or more than he does right now from this group? We get the double hands in the corner. I love it. Let's go to double hands. Kathy, why do you say that? Why should the president keep doing that?
I mean, this is the reason why we voted for President Trump. We're in this situation with North Korea because of long-term bureaucrats doing exactly what long-term bureaucrats do, is get us into a defunct agreements. A couple of days ago this week at the Korean National Assembly, they introduced President Trump as the leader of the world. Not the leader of the free world, not the leader of just the United States, but the leader of the world. And he is showing unashamedly America will come first. And I believe even the international leaders recognize that and are taking a collective sigh of relief that we finally have someone in office who says what he means what he says.
details on all of this diplomacy. Jack King, good to see you. Thank you for being here, General. Happy Veterans Day, and thank you for your years and decades of service in the military, protecting us all. Thank you, General.
Thanks, David, and best to our veterans out there.
Thank you so much. So let's get to the president's comments on Russia. It boggles the mind sometimes to think of how many presidents have said they trusted Vladimir Putin, going back to George W. Bush, of course, President Obama whispering little favors to Vladimir Putin in his ears and others' ears, and now President Trump. What do you make of all this?
Well, I don't make too much of it. I mean, here's where I think where the president's coming from. I mean, he believes that if he has a relationship, a personal relationship with another head of state, that gives him some leverage to work tough issues. It doesn't mean that he's making any accommodation to that leader on matters of policy. I know for a fact that team that surrounds him on national security, to a person, is very clear-eyed about Russia. They know that Russia sees the United States as their strategic enemy. Russia is an adversary of the United States. They're trampling on our allies' interest in Europe. They're trampling on our interest in the Middle East. They're aligned politically and militarily with Iran. They are helping North Korea, as we've come to find out now. So, yes, we have to go in and talk to the Russians to be sure. We don't ignore them. But we go in there on firm ground knowing who we're dealing with. And personally, Putin is a thug. And I'm confident the president knows.
I think it would be a great thing, especially as it relates to North Korea. How specifically could Russia help us calm down the situation with North Korea?
Well, it's come to light there's a possibility that Russia is providing backdoor assistance to North Korea, while the Chinese and other countries are cutting off all assistance to North Korea. After all, the UN resolution that Russia supported was that all the nations would stop doing business with North Korea. And most countries of the world have done that. So the noose is getting tighter. And if Russia is backdooring that and ignoring that, and the only reason they would be doing it is because it's not in the United States' interest. Russia usually takes an opposing view of anything the United States is doing in the world. They clearly see us as a strategic enemy. Would it be good to sit down and talk to the Russians about that and maybe put some evidence in front of them of why we have come to that conclusion? You betcha. That's something we should be doing.
Well, and I'll tell you some evidence. The evidence of 3 carrier groups off the coast of Korea right now, despite the president's calming remarks. That sends a clear message to North Korea and to China and to Russia that the U.S. is not fooling around and getting tough with North Korea.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I mean, they're not there by accident. That has all to do with the president being in the Far East and reassuring our allies that American leadership is back in the Indo-Pacific. This is very critical because our allies have been pushed around by China out there for a long time now, and this is sending a message not just about North Korea, but about American leadership, that we are exercising global leadership, and we do not intend for the Chinese to trample on our interest in the Pacific. And of course, we're sending loud messages about the trade imbalance that's been taking place in the Indo-Pacific for years, and the president wants to bring that to a halt.
General, I'm getting a wrap, but I just, have we ever seen 3 carrier groups in that concentrated a form in the seas before?
Well, the last time was over 10 years ago. And so, yes, it's highly unprecedented, to be sure. It is all about sending a message. Yeah, we've got an exercise going on, but the real thing is this is what we do. You have arrows in your quiver to reinforce the diplomats. This is military strength reinforcing policy development. And that is something we gave up for the last 8 years.
Right. We're carrying a big stick now. General Jack Keane, good to see you, my friend. Thank you very much. And again, happy Veterans Day.
the stated goals of the president's trip to Asia was to unify Pyongyang's neighbors against the Kim Jong-un regime and to try and convince North Korea to abandon its nuclear program. And I'm wondering if you think that the president has gotten any closer to accomplishing that goal.
Well, we won't know, for the coming days and months when we see words translated into action or not. But I do take it as positive that he rekindled what seemed to be warm personal relations with President Xi of China, with Prime Minister Abe in Japan. I don't think warm personal relations are everything, but I think they're certainly helpful, can be helpful. Yeah. And we'll see if he can turn some of that into policy on the ground. But we won't know for a little while yet.
And no big surprises out of this trip, as far as you're concerned?
No. I mean, in some ways, the surprise was, everyone stayed on script. People did a good job. There's no real major fallout. Nothing blew up. I think it was, in all, a very favorable trip. And if anything, the news this week was not in Asia, where all the leaders were meeting, but it was in the Middle East, where the world was going to hell as Saudi Arabia is engaged in all sorts of really dramatic actions this week. So while that was happening, things were pretty calm and collected in Asia, I thought.
Well, Jim Walsh, we appreciate your time this Saturday. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rick.
What, they may be having an impact.
They could well be, Wolf. Tonight, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is citing some evidence they're getting from human intelligence, indicating that the sanctions have taken a toll on Kim's regime. Tillerson said specifically, members of North Korea's military could be feeling the heat. This comes as President Trump calls on North Korea's closest ally to keep up the pressure on Kim Jong-un. President Trump implores his Asian allies, don't let North Korea's young strongman get away with his weapons buildup.
The future of this region and its beautiful people must not be held hostage to a dictator's twisted fantasies of violent conquest and nuclear blackmail.
Tonight, Trump is hitting Kim Jong-un on two fronts, another personal attack and a call on China to tighten the economic screws on Kim. But at the same time, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says U.S. intelligence indicates the sanctions just imposed on Kim following his hydrogen bomb test in September are working. The highest-ranking North
The president is pressing world leaders to enact even tougher sanctions against the Kim regime. Let's bring in our own Brian Todd. Brian, it looks like some of the recently tightened sanctions